Teresa Kittredge. I'm with 100 Rural Women. I live in Itasca County, so photography, that's just north of Grand Rapids is the major center. I'm about 30 miles north of there in Itasca County, Marcel Township. So really excited to be able to host this webinar today and to be able to engage an elections expert this morning. So a little bit about 100 Rural Women. We're all about making connections and inspiring leadership. That is our goal. We just completed 100 meetings across the state. And from those meetings, we learned what barriers do women face, what are some strategies for coming, how can we better support each other as rural women. And one of the outcomes was we need more mentorship. So this is really a two-pronged webinar today. It's part of our civic mentorship network. It's really an education and information piece about the public sector is where we're starting with our mentorship. And it also is part of our general webinar series where we really try to lift up women doing incredible work in rural Minnesota. So we're going to start out with a couple of introductions this morning. And we are going to throw a few things in the chat. We'll throw a lot in the chat, I should say. And this information will be up on our website following the webinar. But we will be putting vote resources in the chat. You'll hear a lot more about that. And the first thing I want to do is I want to introduce a couple of folks who make this organization run and are who such great contributors to 100 Rural Women. We're very fortunate that we have amazing women working with us. So I'm going to start out with Caitlin. Why don't you introduce yourself, Caitlin, and tell us how you ended up with 100 Rural Women. So.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Caitlin. As Teresa said, I work within the communications and social media aspect of 100 Rural Women. So any communications going out from us is what I get to work on. And I also have the opportunity to work some with webinars and additionally website. I'll pass it off to Alexis.
Good morning, everybody. I'm a brand new intern for 100 Rural Women, and this is actually the first webinar that I will be presenting at, and I'm super excited to be here. And yeah.
You're at the University of Minnesota Morris.
Yeah, University of Minnesota Morris.
Perfecto. Alexa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexa. I am one of the staff members here, started as an intern. My main work is project development, I'd say. I also do some things for video editing, this and that, but mainly my job is the spotlight profiles. So that's kind of that's what I do here. Anybody else I need to pass it off to?
Yeah. Nieves, are you?
Yes, I can. Hi, everyone. My name is Nieves. I'm an intern. I'm from California, and I work in the social media and reading room aspect here at 100 Rural. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I always like to put this guy on the spot because, as I say, this is our future, and we're really lucky to be young, voice-powered rural women. So, Alexis, I'm just going to turn it to you. Welcome, Charlotte. Really excited to have you here today. So, Alexis.
Yeah, so as Teresa mentioned, 100 Rural Women is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we're really trying to make more resources for more women to become part of relationships, networking, leadership, mentorship, and civic engagement. As Teresa mentioned, we just completed over 100 meetings across the state of Minnesota as part of our 100 in 100 project. Where we learned from listening to women, and this led us to feedback that prompted us to create and build a civic mentorship network with the end goal of engaging rural women to mentor 100 rural women to pursue public office and providing public service and voter education. This spring, we were also fortunate to work with 3 graduate students at the U of M Humphrey School on a capstone project, April 2022, The Barriers, Breakthroughs, and Backbone of Elected Rural Women. In this project, the graduate students conducted interviews with elected women, and we learned a lot from these interviews. We're now holding these informational / educational meetings called Learn About It. If anyone is interested or knows any women interested in public office and is looking for a mentor, we will be providing a survey after these sessions for you to fill out and indicate your interest. If you have any friends that were unable to attend but are interested in learning more about these positions, we are recording these meetings, and again, we'll be posting and recording the video on our website. So let's get started. We will be hearing from the lovely election judge, Charlotte Culbertson. She's been election judge and head election judge in many different counties. If you guys have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. And if you feel uncomfortable posting them publicly to the chat, you can send them either to myself or to Alexa or to Caitlin, and they will then ask the question for you. Otherwise, at the end, we will be holding like a special section for questions where you can raise your hand, turn on your mic. Yeah, so I'm just going to get us started with some basic voter information. First of all, how do we even vote? Because that was the main idea of our premise for this meeting. Because like, if people don't know how to vote, how are we going to create this civic mentorship network? So first of all, in Minnesota, to register to vote, you can do it online, on paper in your county election office. I will say the registration deadline has passed, but you can register to vote the same day as you go to do early voting at your county election office. But besides same day, you could still do early voting. Minnesota has same day voter registration. The Minnesota Secretary of State office and Vote 411 are great resources. They offer multiple languages to offer accessible access to voting information by removing those language barriers. And with same day registration, the Minnesota Secretary of State office website has a lot of great information on that. Really, when you come to vote and you're not registered, you really just need a current Minnesota ID card with your correct address of the correct precinct that you will be voting in, and you must re-register if you have moved between when you last registered. So if you do not have a Minnesota ID card, there is a Vote 411 website with other IDs that could possibly be compatible for that. You can also have somebody vouch for you. I know Teresa mentioned in a previous meeting that she had to do that for a neighbor because of technology differences. And then with absentee voting, I will note that the deadline for the request for absentee ballots has passed. And a ballot will not count if it is received after the election day. You do need a witness for that, but the Minnesota Secretary of State office has tracking available for your absentee ballots. And yeah, so with early voting, there's also a resource on 411 for that. And for that, you go to your county election office or offices. Sometimes different areas have multiple locations. And there's a resource on the Secretary of State's office where you can search for that by putting in your address quick. And the county election offices are typically open this election, September 23rd to November 7th. And Minnesota law requires that these locations must be open the last Saturday before the election from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and the day before the election, so Monday, the 7th, until 5 p.m. So what is even on the ballot, specifically this midterm election? There's a resource, again, Secretary of State, and then available would be a sample ballot finder at, again, the Secretary of State's office. But all voters in Minnesota will have U.S. Representative, the Governor and Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State, State Auditor, Attorney General, State Senator, State Representative, and many judicial seats on their ballot. And some of these would be on all of the Minnesota ballots, all of these races would be. And then it may vary depending on your county/township. You may vote for county officials, city officers, school board members, township officers, or any local ballot questions. And then to find a sample ballot, you can go to find a sample ballot, the Secretary of State website has a resource where you can search for a sample ballot and simply see what resources they have available. I'm going to share my screen briefly. So this would be my sample ballot, just as an example. Note that there is a front and back, and it's not an uncommon mistake to miss the back. And it's important to note that you can also like leave sections blank on the ballot and your vote will still count. So if you like forget to do the back. And then finally, where you vote, Secretary of State's office has a poll finder. And again, if you moved after the last time you registered to vote, your precinct has likely changed. Even if you just moved across town, those zones can vary place to place. In Minnesota, the polling places are open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Ballotopedia has a resource for the polling times by state if you are voting in a different state. Okay, that was kind of a lot, but it's kind of just some basic information that we needed to get through before our amazing speaker had a chance to speak. So welcome, Charlotte. We are so excited to have you. And we just came up with some questions for you just in general about elections because of your experience as an election judge, head election judge, and in different counties as well, and as an attorney. So our first question for you would be, why is it important to vote in local elections, or essentially midterm or primary elections?
Well, thank you, Alexis, and good morning to everyone. I'm pleased to be here and talk about elections and voting in general. As Alexis mentioned, I am an attorney and I've been an election judge for quite a few years. But more importantly, as I've said to many people, I've been a voter. I've never missed an election myself. I've voted in every election that I've been eligible for. And I'll admit it's been since the Reagan administration. So some of you can maybe, that'll age me quite a bit. Some of the younger people probably will be looking that up on Google later to see probably how old I am. But for those of you of a certain age, you'll know how long that's been. So whether I've been present or needed an absentee, I myself have never missed an election, whether it's school board, primary, midterm, presidential, I've never missed one. Now, Alexis just went over a few things about how to vote, but it looks like most everybody, at least who's on this Zoom, knows those basics. But if you have any specific questions about that, please don't hesitate to put that in chat, because sometimes it's an odd thing that people do show up at the polls and they're like, "Ooh, do I do this? Don't I do that? How do I do it?" And so it scares them from coming to the polls, because maybe it's been a while, maybe they haven't been out there, maybe things have changed since the last time they actually cast a ballot because they've been disenfranchised and haven't wanted to come out. So don't be afraid to ask any of the questions you may have. As far as voter registration, yes, Minnesota does that straight up to the day that you are casting a ballot. And not only will you need to re-register if you've moved, you'll need to re-register if your name has changed. You'll need to re-register if you've changed apartments, even in the same complex. There's other reasons why you might need to re-register. You may need to re-register if you haven't voted in the last 2 election cycles, because you will have been purged from the election rolls. So there could be many reasons why you will be asked, if you show up at the polls, to re-register. So there are reasons why you may need to re-register, and you should be familiar if with what kind of ID you may need if it's been a while since you voted. So if you want me to go through that, I certainly will. What's on the ballot and why? I'll get to Alexis's question in a second, because I just want to touch on a few things that she said before I go there. Can you leave sections blank on your ballot? Yes, you can. But I want you to be mindful on this year's ballot. There's certainly sections that say you can vote up to 2, you can vote up to 3. because in each of your local elections, there's some I just voted for mine. We had a school board election where you could select 3 school board members. There was only 3 running, and you can vote up to 3. You didn't have to pick 3, but you could choose up to 3. So write in the title of your section, be mindful, because some it'll say you can pick up to 3. You don't need to, you can, or you can leave it blank. So sometimes it's not just a quick, bing, bang, boom, or you can just go in and vote for one thing on that entire ballot and be done. So if all you're interested in voting for is the governor, go in and vote for the governor and be done. If that's the only thing you want to vote for, or if it's a presidential election, go in and vote for the president, or go in and vote for an issue, or go in and vote for whatever. Or you can go through each and every ballot, each and every vote. A non-vote does not, for instance, an uncontested vote, if you leave it blank, it does not count as a vote. There's a lot of judicial votes where they're uncontested. So there's one person running. If you don't choose it, it does not count as a positive. Does that make sense? So if you leave it blank, it's not going to count as a positive vote for that person. So let's say somebody is running against them on a write-in, and that write-in person gets more votes than the non-person got actual selected votes. And that could happen in a small community. That would outcast the other person. So I'm just going to give it a very specific example. Say you have a judge in a small community who people want to vote out, all right? And Judge A is the incumbent, and he's the person running, and everybody is rallying around, Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith, who you think would be a much better judge than that judge who's old curmudgeon on the bench. And everybody's going to rally around Mrs. Smith. Well, if everybody writes in Mrs. Smith and fills in that oval, all the blanks who left out off the judge, those don't count positive for that judge. So that's where the power of leaving those blank is better than selecting them. Does that make sense? So it won't count as a vote for the judge. Those will be empty. So if in doubt, leave it empty instead of just filling it in, is I guess what I'm saying. Because it's better than voting for them if you're not positively, affirmatively wanting that person in office, because there could be something else being put forward that's positive in a different way, I guess is what I'm saying. So if you're not sure and you don't really know, you're actually casting a vote for them when you're filling in the oval. And then the other thing, so to answer Alexis's question, why is it important to vote? And what's on the ballot each and every time? Minnesota runs opposite the presidential election. So the president gets elected every 4 years. And during the midterm, which is the opposite 2 years, which we're at right now, every single election in Minnesota is up. Our governor, every single house in our state legislature, and all of our executive offices, which is our Secretary of State, our Attorney General, our Treasurer, our Auditor, the whole governing body for Minnesota is up right now. State legislatures are who make our rules, right? Everybody, you've probably heard it said that all politics are local, and that's true. Because national level can pass federal laws, but it's the states that impact you. And the biggest example of this right now is Roe versus Wade, right? The Supreme Court has said abortion is now left up to the states. So now each and every state can pass whatever rules that it wants regarding reproductive rights for women. And so it's now going to be left up to the state legislatures to determine when and how and if that right will be given to women. And so it's in the hands of our state legislature and our governor. And so who we choose to put in office is what we're doing, right? And so that's why we have to make the choice that aligns with what we want. And if we don't show up, then our voices aren't heard, whichever way you go with it. And that's what's on the ballot this year. So it's not just the presidential election. That's not 2 years, it's the midterms. Also, local elections happen every election. School board, water conservatory, budgets, judges, they're on every ballot because they run on odd terms, right? They don't run necessarily 4 years, whatever. Some have run 6, some run 2, mayors and things like that. So their term limits and times are all kittywampus. And so they could be on any ballot at any time. And so if you're concerned about your school board and your city council and your commissioners and all that, you have to show up at each and every election every 2 years to see who's on that very local election. And school boards are doing all kinds of things these days with school curriculum and books and, don't say gay and, transgender information and all kinds of things that school boards are trying to pass. And so it's very, very interesting times, and things are happening because people are either sitting on the sidelines and not getting involved or allowing it because they believe that that's their, that's the way they want their schools to be. And I'm not judging either way, but that's what's happening in our communities. And it's going to mean that people have to show up to vote one way or another if that's how they want their governing bodies to be. Did I answer that?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Our next question would be, how do you count the ballots as an election judge and as somebody who has worked in elections? And could you tell us a bit more about voter fraud and some of the misconceptions around that?
Yeah, I can. So in Minnesota, we still vote by paper ballot, but they're counted in a electronic machine. So they're put into a ballot counter, okay? And that box it's basically a locked box. It's fed on the top. So you feed it into a box and that's counted, and it records. It's a scantrometer, basically. It's like the old test machines. It'll read those bubbles and it'll record what the what you tallied, what you filled in. And at the end of the night, it prints off a tape of all of the bubbles for each of the elections. And if there's a doubt, we obviously have the paper record of what was fed, because we still have the paper ballots that went into that machine. So for anyone who thinks that a ballot that went in that was marked for candidate A somehow triggered and gave us a report of candidate B, it would be kind of odd that every single thing on the tape would be candidate B, candidate B, candidate B, candidate B, right? That there would be no things. And the election judges at the end of the night have to sign those tapes. And if we saw 0 votes for candidate A and all the votes for candidate B, we would see that something was wrong, and we would have to check the paper ballots against the tape. But I'll set that aside for now. But they go through the machine. The paper ballots are maintained for a minimum of 2 years in the county in a sealed box. And those tapes also get maintained and get sent to the local county election office. So keep in mind that the ballot box at each location, where you're at each precinct, that box is not connected to anything except electricity. It is not connected to the internet. It is not connected to the other boxes in the precinct. It is not connected to anything that's, quote, hackable, all right? Somebody would have to come in and physically attach something to that box in our presence to somehow trigger a hacking event, right? And there's somebody standing there within 6 feet throughout the entire day watching that box. We run what they call a zero tape first thing in the morning. The box comes to us sealed with a wire, clip, I guess is the best way to put it, that requires wire cutters. It has a sealed number that we have to record on a sheet. 2 people have to cut it off with like a wire cutter, record that we cut it off, before we open up the electronic counter. I mean, it's a process. And once that gets opened up, then they can start feeding the ballots. And we run that tape and it shows 0000 for each and every candidate. Then the things can start being run through. And so we know it's 0 when it starts. We know what it looks like at the end. And we have all of the paper to back it up. So how are they counted? On a machine that's pretty hack proof, and isolated right there in the precinct, and has the backup for the paper. Now, I just want one more thing to mention about counting. Nothing is official in Minnesota until the counts go through what they call a canvassing board. At the end of the election, after the election night, there are random canvassing boards in each and every county that physically counts the ballot elections and matches them to the tapes. And it's random. It's chosen by the Secretary of State. They'll call the county and say, you have to recount precincts 1, 5, and 7, right? The county officials have no idea. It's done for each of the 87 counties. They have to randomly recount certain precincts. And they literally have to sit with people from the county that they get, either volunteers or county workers or what have you. And they physically have to sit in a room and they have to count their ballots and match them to their election tapes. And it's overseen by people from the state, and everything has to be counted and canvassed and checked and verified before the state, the Secretary of State will verify the numbers from that county. And I've participated in the canvassing board for Dakota County, and it's no fun. Your eyes go wacky by the time you're done counting all these bubbles and matching it up on things. But we check and double check and triple check not only those machines, but the machines against the ballot against each other. Everything gets checked multiple ways before the Secretary of State actually verifies those numbers and sends them off for the actual results for Minnesota. So there's no monkey business going on with the counting. If that answers it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a great answer. And then, since this webinar is particularly focused on young voters and first-time voters, what should people expect as a first-time voter? I haven't voted yet either, but I've worked as an election judge, so I know how the process works, but a lot of people have not had the privilege of having that experience. So what should people expect as a first-time voter, and how would they be prepared to come to the polls?
So one of the best ways you can prepare to vote is go to the Secretary of State's, and I think you've already posted it, look at a sample ballot for your actual precinct, see what's going to be on your ballot, look in your local newspaper to see if the candidates have done any kind of a positioning, and try to get yourself educated about who's got what kind of position that might align with your views. Talk to friends and neighbors and see if what the issues may be that may align with yourself. Get educated. That would be my number one thing before you come to the polls. When you come to the polls, you can bring your own sample ballot with you. You can bring paper into the polls. We would prefer you don't bring electronic devices with you, because you could then be taking pictures of things and doing other things there, and photographs are not permitted at the polls, but you are allowed to bring paper things into the polls with you. So if it is your first time and you're registering, or if it's your first time and you've recently registered, you should be prepared to bring ID with you, because there may be issues so bring your photo ID and bring your proof of residency if just in case your photo ID may be expired or not have your right residence on it. And you should be prepared to, show that, prove that to the election judge. And then if it's a big turnout election, be prepared to wait. So, depending where you live, be prepared to wait. And then you'll register or sign in on the roster. Yes, some of them are using tablets nowadays for the sign in roster, but some of them still use the old paper ballot. You'll be asked to reaffirm the oath that you are still legally able to vote, that your voting rights haven't been taken away from you for any reason, that you are who you say you are, and you're doing that under penalty of perjury. You'll be asked to sign the roster, and then you'll be given a ballot receipt, which you'll then take over to a ballot judge. You'll give them the receipt, you'll be handed your ballot, and then you'll go to a privacy location, a booth, or you can sit at a table or wherever you choose. And then you'll fill out your ballot, and then you'll go over to that ballot box and deposit it. You'll probably be asked to stand there for a second to make sure that there's no problems with the ballot. And then the ballot screen would say, "Thank you for voting." You'll be given a little voting sticker that said, "I voted," and that'll be it. If there is a problem with the ballot, the screen will say something like double voted. Sometimes it'll tell us there's empty ones. They probably won't on this one. If it's a blank, they'll probably just take it, because there's going to be so many elections that are uncontested that people will just leave those blank. And so, especially judicial offices, there's a ton of them. So they're probably not even going to tell us if things are blank. But if there's double votes, like if you go in and you vote for 2 offices for the governor, right? If you vote for both Walz and Jensen, you can't do that. You got to pick one or the other. That's a double vote. And so it'll reject that ballot. If you as the voter say, "No, I don't care, I want you to take it," you can do that. You can override the machine, but your entire vote for governor won't count, because you can't count both. So it'll cancel it out. It'll be a no vote for that office. The rest of your ballot will count. So that's what you should expect. Expect to bring ID. If it's your first time, expect to possibly wait, and you'll sign, you'll get your ballot, you'll vote.
Awesome, thank you. At this time, does anybody have any questions for Charlotte at all? Oh, we had a question come in. Can you please speak to how write-in votes are counted or not counted depending on whether or not a written request has been filed?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is this. Write-in candidates have had to register to run in a particular election or not. And if they have done their proper paperwork and have filed for the particular office that they're actually running for, then they are, quote, an official candidate, and their votes will be counted in that particular election. If they are not, and this goes by each office, right? So if they have fulfilled whatever requirements are necessary for them to be an official write-in candidate, the county will notify us ahead of time before the day of election that you have a write-in candidate in such and such an office, and you have a write-in candidate in such and such an office. And before the election starts that day, we're told, tonight you have to count write-ins in this vote and in this vote and in this vote. And so at the end of the night, after everything is done, we have to take the ballots and we have to count any write-ins in those particular elections. So, and we have a sheet that we have to tally them on. And when I say we, it's all of the election judges that are present in the precinct that night. And one thing I should mention for anybody who's never worked in an election, the precinct judges are balanced by party. So when we sign up to be precinct judges, we everybody who's there working doesn't know the affiliation of each other. But as the chief judge, I know the affiliation of everyone, because there's certain tasks that require two people of different parties to do them. And so for instance, if ever there's a jam in the machine that counts the ballots and I have to open the box, it requires two people from different parties to open that box to be present to unjam the machines. So that anytime the box is opened, two people from different parties are touching the ballots, and then we have to record that on an incident log, that there was, you know, a jam, and these are the two people who opened it, and this is what we did. So that at night, if we're touching the ballots, there are at least, you know, 8 people there with an even split. You can't have more than 2 off on the demographics of the party split. So an even split of party demographics will be counting those write-ins and recording them on sheets to be handed in to the county office on which write-in parties there are. So the county official tells us which offices have write-ins that have properly registered, and we have to count those write-ins at night and record them on a log for the county official. So that's how that gets done.
Okay, thank you. We just had a question pop in. What if you ordered a mail-in ballot but decided you want to vote in person on election day? Do you need to bring the absentee ballot with you?
No, in fact, all you need to do is just discard your absentee or that you got, or just ignore it or toss it, do whatever you want with it, in fact, and then just go to the polls. What happens when you do vote and send in your absentee ballot is it is recorded and a notation is made on the roster that is sent to the polling location. So for instance, I vote absentee every time because I work in a precinct different from the precinct I'm registered in. And so I can't leave my precinct and go vote. So I have to vote. Say I didn't do that and I, you know, didn't work that day, and I go to my precinct, there'll be a notation on that roster that says I've already voted. And so I could not vote again because that notation is on the roster. So if you send it, but if I fail to send it in, there's no notation. So just go to the polling place and vote. You don't need to send in an absentee. So if in doubt, I always encourage people, even if you think you're not going to be able to be available on election day, order that absentee ballot, have it at home, you know, just have it there as a backup in case you're going to think you're going to miss election day for one reason or another. And then you could always send it in. You know, you can even drop it off the day before election. You could drop it off at your county office if you need to. And then, or you can just go vote on voting day.
Thank you. And then there's another question in the chat. Is there a place where voters can find written platform planks for each political party and each candidate?
Oh, I wish there was. The League of Women Voters is one place that usually has some decent information but as we get into smaller, more rural communities, it gets harder and harder. I know out here in Morris, our little paper just did a little write-up on most of our local candidates. I'll let some of the other folks talk about some of their specific things that they may have done, or if they have any other ideas. I know that the major parties do have things. The DFL and the RNC do have things on their websites. I know obviously when the presidential elections run around, they all have their own major websites. But I don't know, once you start getting into the much smaller candidates, it gets much harder to find actual resources. It takes a lot to look for those.
Thank you. Another question popped in. Can you talk about recounts and how close elections can be?
Yeah, there are automatic recounts that get triggered if, I want to say, at a certain percentage. I couldn't tell you what the number is right off the top of my head, but if things are within a certain percentage, there's an automatic recount. And the candidates can request a recount if it's within a certain number as well. And it is exactly like it sounds. It's a recount. And it would be counted by each county and then resubmitted. But there's, like I said, there's automatic recounts triggered if it's within a certain percentage, and then candidates can request a recount. And it would be exactly like I just said. They could either run them through, take all the ballots out of the sealed boxes, rerun them through a machine, confirm them, or they can do it by hand. But I would imagine most of them are just rerun through machines. So, and confirmed against the previously recorded numbers.
Here's another question. What is voter suppression? How does it target women, women of color, or young voters?
So voter suppression can happen in quite a few ways. One would be just discouraging people from coming out, making them think that their voices don't count. That's a big way. Another way is just to make them believe that they can't have an impact. Another is making it very, very difficult by requiring or making them believe that they don't have the right ID, or they can't get it done, or that it's going to be too difficult once they get to the polls. There's quite a few ways that people can be discouraged from coming. Anything that makes a voter think that they don't matter or that they can't get it accomplished once they come out is, in my opinion, voter suppression. And there's plenty of people out there that are doing that. And we need to do all we can. You heard somebody mention vouching earlier. Vouching is a way of getting someone registered to vote when they don't have the proper ID because of many reasons. And it's a very surprising statistic. It shouldn't be, but a lot of women don't have utilities in their name. They don't have anything other than maybe just a Minnesota ID. It could be expired. Maybe they stopped driving, what have you. And because maybe they've just left an abusive situation or whatever, they don't have any of the things that are required for voter registration. But they have a neighbor, and that neighbor can vouch for where they live. That's what's needed in Minnesota. And the more we step up for each other, the more we can actually fight the voter registration, the voter suppression. And women of color, women, Native women out here in this rural community, that happens to them quite a bit. People on the reservation don't have ID other than tribal ID sometimes, and they cannot. There is no proof of residency because they don't even sometimes have addresses for where they're living. And they need to have those neighbors willing to come in and say, I'm a registered voter. I'm vouching for where this person lives. They are in this precinct. And that's necessary because it's if they don't do that, that is voter suppression in my mind, because we need each other to step up and do that for each other, especially for women, because a lot of people don't have that specific ID to get that done. So, and it's anything that makes it harder to vote, in my mind, is voter suppression.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about people losing their right to vote. How do you lose your right to vote? And you hear stuff on the news about felons voting. Could you clear up that a little bit?
Yeah, so anyone who's what we call on paper for a convicted felony is loses their right to vote. Now, on paper means they are they have not finished their probationary period, right? So these people are out of jail, right? If they had to go to jail at all, but they are still on probation. So they are still reporting to a probation officer. And they cannot register to vote. at least for now in Minnesota. They are in a database with the BCA, with the criminal courts. Our Minnesota registration rolls, voter registration rolls, are checked against at least 16 databases before each election. They're checked against DMV, they're checked against the Secretary of State, obviously, they're checked against death records, DHS, birth records, they're checked against the BCA, they're checked against the courts, they're checked against the federal courts, they're checked against a bunch of databases to alert for that. And if there are any matches, like say my name is in there and my name is on a district court or federal court registry for being someone who's within the felony, there would be a notation that, like that absentee notation, there would be a felony notation on the name. Now, if somebody comes in to register brand spanking new, maybe they've just moved in from Missouri or something, and they're saying, here's my driver's license and I'm here to vote today, and they have a felony, say in Missouri, and they're coming in and they're registering, yeah, we're not going to catch that. Okay, we're not. So if they have a valid Minnesota driver's license here in Minnesota and they're on probation, federal probation in Missouri, and they haven't finished that, it's not going to get caught. But they are signing a document that says, under the penalty of perjury, that they are able to vote. Where it is going to get caught, I mean, it's not going to get caught that day. They'll be able to vote. But when that paperwork goes through and that application goes through the Secretary of State, it's going to get caught there, because that's when that is going to get verified through those same databases again. And when it comes through as being, oh my, that person's a felon, it gets kicked back to the county attorney. And that county attorney is able to then prosecute that person for voting as an ineligible felon, I'm sorry. And they are then charged with a felony for voting fraud. And that's how you hear about these fraud cases. So that person, if they registered to vote, knowingly still on probation as a felon, and they're prosecuted as a felon, would be one of the very few and rare cases of when it would be prosecuted in Minnesota for voter fraud. Now, Minnesota has had a few, and since 2020, and I confirmed this with the Secretary of State just recently because I did another presentation. Since 2020, we've had 3.5 million votes cast in different elections, and we've had 16 cases of voter fraud, of knowing voter fraud, whether it was somebody registering to vote when they weren't eligible, voting in the wrong precinct knowingly, or whatever other reasons that they voted when they shouldn't have. 16 cases of it out of 3.5 million votes. So it is statistically a zero voting fraud case in Minnesota.
Thank you for clearing that up. We're going to take one last question, and then we're going to move on to some closing question statements. If someone is in the process of a name change and has court paperwork showing the new name, but not an official ID yet, can the court paperwork be used to register at the polls? Or in this case, is vouching for the person the best?
Hi, RG. No, sorry. Court paperwork is not enough for a name change. It has to be the ID, and because vouching will do it for your residential location. That's what vouching is for, is to vouch for your precinct. But your name and your ID needs to be the picture ID needs to match your name. Vouching is only for where you live. Does that make sense? So your name change has to be official on your picture ID.
Thank you. And lastly, do you have any big takeaways or closing statements that you would like to make? Just overall messages that you want people to hear?
Voting in Minnesota is safe and secure. The elections in Minnesota are fair. I would tell people don't let the hype, and let me say this. I only speak for Minnesota elections, right? What happens in Arizona, what happens in Massachusetts, what happens in Pennsylvania, I have no idea. I don't work the elections there. I don't know about the elections there. They could all be horrible. I don't know. I'm talking about Minnesota elections, and that's where we all live. And this is where we all vote. So, set aside the noise and look at what the facts are here. Okay, the facts here are, we have the best probably election system in the country. We do back up our electric system with paper, which is the gold standard, right? Keep the paper, do it electrically, and back it up when you need to. And if there's if somebody's claiming the electric didn't work, we have go to the paper and count it and check. Oh, by the way, we do that. And we've been doing that forever, right? And we check it. We run our stuff through all the databases, but we count on each other to trust it. One of the things that I will do as a takeaway, we have 87 counties in Minnesota. It takes 30,000 election officials in Minnesota to run an election. If there was going to be fraud and conspiracy in Minnesota, you'd have to get 30,000 people in 87 counties across the state of Minnesota all on the same page. I would challenge any of you to get 5 friends to agree to go to the same place for lunch, let alone 30,000 people to commit the same kind of fraud for the same kind of thing. It just isn't going to happen, let alone the fact that election officials as well can be charged with felonies for not doing our duty on election day, right? We all take pledges to do what we're supposed to do, not for one candidate, but for our country. We go out there and do what we're supposed to do just to make sure that the elections are run fairly for everybody, and leave our own politics aside when we do it. And so I would say, trust the process, get out there. Our process does work. It doesn't always work the way we want it to come out. I've been heartbroken by some election results myself, but I still get out there and help them run the next time as well, so that they continue to be accessible to everyone. And that's the goal, making sure that they're open, full, fair for everyone who wants to be out there, and encouraging everyone to get out there and vote and be part of the process.
Thank you so much. The information you provided has been extremely helpful and useful. I'm now going to pass it on to Teresa for some final closing statements.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Charlotte, for joining us this morning. This was very information rich, and just to remind everybody that we will be following up with this recording on our website and with the resources, because I know we have a ton of resources we put in front of folks today. And also, Charlotte, thank you for your service as an election judge. I did it for my first time a couple of years ago, and I think it's an experience everybody should do, because it sure gives you a better sense of what voting's all about. And thanks, Alexis, for your facilitation and leading and building this meeting today. I just want to also say that Alexis has been busy doing a lot of outreach with high schools. So this recording will also be used with a lot of students, and a lot of folks who couldn't make it this morning will be viewing this on our website. So we're just so thankful to be able to build this library of voting resources and to be able to share this, because our goal really is to inform, educate, and empower women. So thanks again for all of that. Also, I want to talk a little bit about, for those of you from other states, when we talk about Minnesota, we're a small state compared to a couple of the states of folks who are on here. I know we have New York and California. Secretary of State is a great resource in every state. So go out to their website, go to Vote 411 is a great resource. Also, Ballotpedia is a great resource. And when I think about Secretary of State's in Minnesota, for example, you can go out there, and if candidates so choose, you can link right to their website. You can learn more about them. Or you go out and look at our Secretary of State's website if you're in Minnesota, and you can look at the different candidates, and you can look at what things are an issue. Because as we all know, and this whole other issue, as we lose more local papers in rural, it's really a lot more difficult to get information on candidates. So I just want to thank everybody for joining today. And we talked a little bit about how you can stay better connected with 100 Rural Women. We have a reading room. We have a book group that meets once a week. Every month, fiction 1 month, nonfiction the next. Join us. One of the big things that we say about that is it's real and you don't have to have your homework done. So if you haven't read the entire book, don't worry about it. Just come for the conversation. I have read authors I would have never read. So it's really been a great experience. And we have people from all over with the state and outside of the state that join that. So please check that out. We also are going to have, we have an Ask a Leading Woman series, which is another program that emanated from our 100 meetings, where we heard from women that they wanted to learn more about women's leadership journeys. And that's another piece of mentorship to find out, how did you get there and how did you navigate that? And what's still going on and what are some of your struggles? So we will have another Leading Women with Miri Villard on November 9th, right, Alexa, at 12:30. And so keep our website. When you go out to our website, we have an events tab. Just check that out and see what we've got going. Holidays, we're going to step back a little bit. We have had a wild year. We have done 100 meetings across the state. We've been we've been piloting, testing, and now we want to step back and look at the research, look at the data, and figure out how we can be a best resource to rural women. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining this morning. Please stay connected with 100 Rural Women. We're so glad you could be here this morning, and check out our website afterwards. And again, thank you so much, Charlotte, for taking the time to spend with us today, and good luck with the election. I know those are super long days. So thanks everybody for joining us this morning.